Hello, how's it going? As you might be able to tell, I am back in New York. I think my Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes video vlog should go up before this if I edit it in time. But yes, so you'll have already seen that I'm back. But we got back, I mean, like a week ago from when I'm filming this, but probably a couple weeks ago from when you're seeing it. Basically, we were staying at a house that her dad works and lives out of 1 week a month or something, and then the rest of the time it's an Airbnb, and there was an Airbnb booking. So we had to leave. So here we are. Sorry about my hair. I was excited that I could finally kind of put it into a little ponytail, though I kind of want to cut it short again, but it was still exciting. But it looks a little greasy, so we're gonna overlook that. Today we're gonna talk about books I've read and things I have seen or watched, I guess, since in the last few weeks, last month, since I last made a vlog, essentially. So first I want to insert a clip that I made I think at the beginning of May, and it covered like the books and shows I'd read and watched at that point. So I'll insert that here so that I don't need to talk about all of them again. I wanted to talk about some things I've read and things I've watched because that's pretty much all I have to talk about right now. I feel like during this time. First things first. Normal People. I talked about Normal People in my last kind of weekly vlog. I don't know if you can see all my little tabs in this, but there are a lot. A lot of highlights happened in here. I wanted to talk about the show. I already talked about the book. I really, really enjoyed it. But since the last video, I actually watched the show, and oh my god, I feel like we have been blessed with maybe a perfect adaptation. The acting was stunning. The intimacy of the show felt so like raw and real and true to this book. And there are very few complaints, not even complaints I have about the show overall, like very few differences from the book in general. I just think it was such a good show. I think I would definitely recommend reading the book before watching the show, but if you have absolutely no interest in the book, I think it's a great show on its own. It's told in 25-minute, like around 25 half an hour mark episodes, and I think there's 12 of them. So that's 6 hours, which is about the same as like if you were to listen to the audiobook of this, I think that's around the same time. So really, really good amount of time to sit with the characters, but not like too much. You don't feel like you've been exhausted of it. I just think they were the perfect length episodes to settle in to a portion of Connell and Marianne's story, and I thought they were just so good. Episode 10 especially, like the depiction of Connell's depression and just everything he goes through in the later half of the show is so stellar. It's just so stunning. The acting there, also the fact that Noma from Cursed Child was in it. Love that little cameo. Oh yeah, just great. There is a lot of nudity if that's something that you don't like. You see it all, but it's just so good. Okay, I have to stop gushing because I feel like if I don't, I'm gonna take these off actually for the reflection. I feel like I have to stop gushing because I feel like I could go on forever. But the book I read after that was, after Normal People, was an audiobook of Perfect Tunes by Emily Gould, G-O-U-L-D. And this was, I would recommend not reading the description of the book because it spoils something that happens like pretty far into the novel, which was kind of interesting. I just picked this up honestly because I liked the cover and I liked the premise. It was set in like the 90s or early 2000s in the East Village in New York. It's a girl who moves there to become a singer-songwriter and what happens. Kind of how her life changes and how the city changes. And it was okay. There was, this is like a really weirdly specific comment, but because I was listening to the audiobook, it felt like I retained this more. There were so many instances of vomiting, like getting drunk and throwing up, getting sick and throwing up. There's just like a lot of that. So if you're someone who doesn't like that, I found it really off-putting. I found it weird how often she depicted that throughout the book. Like it happened at least 4 or 5 times, which was not ideal. But overall, I thought it was kind of interesting. It's a really nice crossover novel if you're someone who reads more YA. I think it's a really approachable adult novel because it does have a teenage, it has like a 20-something main character at the beginning and then has a teenage main character later on, or main character, side character. But yes, let's talk about a couple of things I've been watching. I have been obsessed with Disney YouTube channels, specifically things like Defuctland and Yesterworld and various things like that. I don't know if this is something you've ever heard of before, but I really look awful in this lighting. I'm gonna see if I can change this. I don't know if this is any better, it just might be more orange, but we're gonna go with it because it looks a little less flat. Yes, Disney YouTube channels, I've been obsessed with them. There are so many out there and just so many cool videos out there of people like diving into Disney history and things that are closed that used to be attractions or experiences in the Disney parks. I know a lot about Disney history, but there have been a few things here that I've learned, and also it's just so nice to see things from my childhood, especially from like the opening days of California Adventure, which is like a very formative experience in my Disney life. I remember so much of that. The 50th anniversary of Disney was what made me fall in love with Disney and later go on to work there. I just loved the whole celebration so much. And the 45th, those are like the 45th and 50th were very formative in my love of Disney. So I've loved those YouTube channels. I'm gonna put a playlist down below of some of my favorite videos that I've watched. I have continued watching Little Fires Everywhere. I've watched I think like 3 or 4 episodes of it and I'm really enjoying it. I've been taking it kind of slow. It's not really something I feel like is super bingeable, so I have not, but I do want to keep watching that. Another show I've watched is Disney Plus's new pop culture show. Again, this deep dives into I think like 8 different Disney films, and there's like a prop collector who is looking at old props from these different films. The Mary Poppins one made me sob. Loved it so much. I also really enjoyed the Pirates of the Caribbean and Narnia ones because those were 2 of my favorite films growing up, and I'm the kind of person who grew up watching like all the deleted scenes, all the behind the scenes. I listened to cast commentaries and like director commentaries. I was very into that growing up, especially with my favorite films. So I knew a lot of stuff, and like I knew a lot of the filmmakers and like creators of the props and things as they came into the show. I was like, oh, it's Richard Taylor. He's like a voice of my childhood because of Lord of the Rings and other Weta projects. So very cool if you're into that sort of thing. The Half of It is a Netflix show, and I actually did some work with them on my Instagram and Twitter. I live tweeted watching it for the first time, and it was so good. If you're looking for just like a pretty, I mean, I wouldn't say it's super light, but it's a fairly light rom-com. I like a rom-com with a little more drama to it, so really enjoyed that. Very sweet, about a kind of shy queer girl who writes a lot of people's essays at school, like it's paid to, and then a jock pays her to write a love letter to a girl and she ends up falling for the girl instead. It's kind of the premise. So it was very sweet. I liked that a lot. I did end up watching all of Little Fires Everywhere and thought it was very, very good. Very well done. So if you have not checked that out yet, I recommend watching it. And here are things that I have read since. The next book that I read was Anna Weiner's Uncanny Valley, and this is a memoir from the perspective of a woman who was living in New York, working in publishing, and then decided that she was not being like well paid enough and couldn't really live on what she was making, and so she moves into the tech industry, eventually moves to San Francisco to work in tech, and kind of her experience there. If you don't know anything about like the tech bro world of San Francisco, then I think this would be pretty interesting. I knew a bit about it, but also I didn't know a lot about it, so I found that element interesting. But I found it kind of like meandering and just, I don't know, it didn't blow my mind in any way. It kind of just like confirmed a lot of my assumptions about that. Yeah, I don't know. It was fine. I feel like I talked about Weather by Jenny Offill in something, like in a vlog or something, but I will talk about it again in case I haven't. I took pretty thorough notes on it when I read it, so really enjoyed it. If you don't know, Weather is essentially about a woman who is working in a library but isn't technically a librarian. She wasn't actually certified. She wants to be a psychiatrist. She ends up taking a job for a friend of hers and like doing her emails, and this friend has a podcast, I believe it is, about like climate change and the world, and etc. And thus the main character gets pulled into that world and like exposed to a lot of preppers and people who are afraid of the world ending, and it's kind of that sense of impending doom when you get too caught up in the thoughts of climate change and what's going on in our planet. The whole book very much, it's a very short novel, but it very much felt like that moment when something's about to happen. It's on the verge of happening, but like there's a lot of tension, but it hasn't actually happened yet. So I feel like that's kind of like the mood I'd describe for this novel. One of the best quotations I feel like really kind of sums it up, and it's, "My number one fear is the acceleration of days. No such thing supposedly, but I swear I can feel it." And like that is a very good indicator of like the mood and the writing. It's told in a series of kind of vignettes, like little just short like passages of story, kind of a different format than a lot of people might be used to. It very much reminded me of The Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss, if you've read that. Very kind of quite different in story, but similar like writing and also, I don't know, vibe. I do feel like overall it assumes a lot of the reader's perspective and kind of temperament and belief system. It very much relies on the reader being someone who's already quite curious and concerned about climate change, who might already be feeling a sense of existential dread, which I am. I also just feel like it really plays up that feeling that a lot of people feel, that you're never doing enough. There was, early on in the book, there was a little like quote that was, "Young person worry, what if nothing I do matters? Old person worry, what if everything I do does?" Which I feel like quite conveniently sums a lot of it up. I think it deals with that, again, that feeling that no matter how much you do, there's always more you could be doing, and like you get into this cycle of just like you're never gonna do enough, and what if even if you do all those things, nothing matters. So I do feel like it made me feel a certain kind of way, you know? But I thought it was quite good. I would recommend it if that sounds at all up your street. The next thing I read was Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo, and I really love this. I've read all of Elizabeth Acevedo's novels so far, novels in verse, I think all of them are. She writes in verse. This one was, I just really enjoyed it. I think it was my favorite. It tells the story of a father who dies in an airplane crash, and he has a family, or at least a daughter, down in the Dominican Republic, and then also a daughter in New York City, a daughter and a wife in New York City, and they don't know about each other, and they find out about each other after his passing and kind of navigate that situation. I just thought it was a really beautiful portrayal of grief and how different people experience it, and also forgiveness. It was really good. If you have liked Elizabeth Acevedo's work in the past, this really lives up to it. I think it exceeds it. Stellar, very beautiful writing. The next book I read was The Only Black Girls in Town by Brandy Colbert, who is one of my favorite authors, one of my favorite YA authors, and this is her first middle grade. And it is about a girl named Alberta who lives in a seaside town in California, and is the only black girl in her grade and one of the few black families in town. She has two fathers who are both black, and then across the street moves in another girl and her mother who are also black, and she's really excited because she has someone on her street who is also black, and it's just so cute. I just love these girls. I love the way their friendship builds and how they experience things differently. The girl who moves in across the street has moved from Brooklyn, so she's grown up in a very different world and had very different experiences throughout her life, and it's just great. They discover a box of journals in the Airbnb that the girl and her mom move into in the attic, and they go through these journals and kind of discover a sad past. It deals with a lot of just like kind of normal middle grade issues, but then also deals with things like racism, both that the girls faced, but then also through these journals they kind of find a painful past with racism. And yeah, it was just so cute. And I think, sorry about that music, I thought that was a car passing, but I think they've just turned on this music. This happens multiple times a day here. Love that for me. All right, we'll pick this up in a few. The next book I finished was Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, and I've been meaning to read this for ages, knowing nothing about what it was, and I actually picked it up in like end of February, early March, and did not know it was about a pandemic, and was like, maybe not right now, and then set it down until May, when I picked it back up to finish. But of course, it was wonderful. If you've read it, you probably already know. If you've heard anything about it, you probably know that it's very beloved. And it's definitely like a modern classic, especially in light of the current world. I feel like it's resonating with a lot of people. It's about, yeah, a pandemic hits the world and picks up 20 years later when this troupe of actors and musicians like have banded together and travel across the US to perform Shakespeare and other music and things like that. And it's very good. It's about the tenacity of the human spirit and what we hold dear in times of crisis, and also like the importance of of art and holding on to art and expressing it even in terrible times. It's also just about like the things we hold on to in general. I thought was really interesting. So I thought it was really, really good, and you don't need me to tell you that because I feel like everyone has read this book. And then the last book I read was Ballad of Songbirds of Snakes, and then we're all caught up. And I'm gonna leave my last video to talk about my thoughts on Ballads of Songbirds and Snakes. In general, I thought it was a really great prequel. The more I think about it, the more that I wanted more out of it, but I still really enjoyed it. I love Suzanne Collins' writing. I think she's an incredible storyteller. And yeah. As for what I watched, I mentioned finishing Little Fires Everywhere. Another thing I watched is Never Have I Ever on Netflix, which is a Netflix show about an Indian American girl named Devi whose father dies very suddenly. He has, I think, a heart attack at her orchestra recital, and from that she becomes paralyzed from the waist down, kind of out of shock and grief. Then it picks up, I think 8 or 9 months later, she's able to walk again, and kind of from there, initially it seems like it's just going to be a show about like normal teen things, friendships, crushes, sex, parties, etc. But it has this underlying current of grief and trauma because she watched her father die while she was on stage performing, and she kind of deals with a lot of the trauma of that and other things going on in her life. It also deals with the fact that she's from a very Indian family, living in Southern California, and like the Indian culture and how that kind of differs from how she feels having grown up in America, which I think was done in a really wonderful way. It's written, I think, by Mindy Kaling, or produced or something by Mindy Kaling. So she very much has a hand in it, and the humor in it is very, very funny. There are so many one-liners. At first, when we were watching the first episode, I was like, I don't know if I like this very much. It's a little teeny. What? For me, and I wasn't loving it. But then by the end, I was just like in love with her and the story, and I was sobbing, and it was just a really good season arc, and I'm pretty sure there'll be a season 2. I hope there is. And I think that's all that we have watched that is new. I've been rewatching a ton of stuff. Nothing else is immediately coming to mind, which is probably good because I'm sure this video is long. So the thing I have out from the library right now is If I Had Your Face by Frances Cha. I just started it. I'm like 30 minutes into the audiobook or something, but the reason I wanted to read it was because it's set in Korea and about the like plastic surgery that a lot of Korean women and men undertake, and it's really, really common over there, and this is the perspective of a like group of women who I think are dealing with like the beauty standards in Korea and things like that. I don't know too much about it. I just knew it was vaguely about that, and I'm so interested in that personally. So I wanted to pick that up. I've heard it's really, really incredible as well. A couple of other books that I'm going to pick up soon. I picked this up actually last night and read like 25 pages of it, but it's Severance by Ling. I actually had gotten the audiobook of this earlier in the year. I think it was earlier this year, but I kind of wasn't in the mood for it at the time, and then now I feel like it's slightly more relevant. If you don't know, this is about a pandemic. The little like catchphrase on the back here is it the end of the world or just another day at the office? So I think it's quite It's satirical take on like office culture. Excited about this now that I'm more in the mood for it. And then this actually came out today, the day of filming this, and it's All My Mother's Lovers by Ilana Masad. I picked this up at the Strand as a galley earlier this year as well, and I just haven't gotten to it yet, but I want to now that it's out to talk about it. I talked about it on Instagram a bit, but I want to actually read it and talk about it. And it's about a girl, a 27-year-old woman whose mother dies, and then she's learning about her life. The main character is a lesbian or is queer, and I think her mother also was queer, and I think it kind of deals with that. So that's what I'm reading, what I've watched, what I've read. Apologies for the absence online. Also, sorry if you can hear these screaming children. Y'all, Brooklyn is loud. Did you know? Let me know what you're reading and watching. If there's anything you recommend to me, put it down in the comments below, and I will talk to you in my next video. I don't know if I'm gonna keep doing vlogs. I just feel like I don't have a ton to do and say in a vlog, and I feel like people are so critical right now of people online that I just kind of want to share as little as possible about my actual life in fear. So love that for me. Cool. Farewell. Bye.